Place at the Table is a new documentary that aims to end hunger in America. We've got its directors and celebrity chef Tom Colicchio on today's BFD. All this week we've been dealing with the issues of hunger in America, and it's such a complex issue, but thankfully the film A Place at the Table, which comes out March 1st, does a great job of tackling the issues, and with me are the filmmakers right in front of me, Kristi Jacobson, Lori Silverbush, and celebrity chef Tom Colicchio. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Now, what is it that brought you to this issue?
Well, I had a personal experience with somebody who was going hungry. You know, I'd always heard that there was hunger in this country and had read statistics, but a young girl that I was mentoring, whose family was going through a pretty rough time, was struggling in school. So I helped to get her into a private school that helped kids with learning issues. And I felt really good about it, only to get a call from the principal of her school that she was foraging in the trash for food. So because this wasn't a public school, she wasn't getting her a free lunch or a free breakfast, which in some cases had been her only meal of the day when she had been in her previous school. And so although I was well-meaning in my intentions, I had inadvertently helped to make her hungrier. And I could send food home with her, or we could fill her house with groceries, but the next day or the next week, the problem persisted. And it occurred to me that we weren't actually trying to fix it, or I wasn't able to fix the problem. I was only able to sort of put a Band-Aid on it temporarily. It was very frustrating. As a filmmaker, I thought maybe I should make a movie about this, but if I wrote a screenplay about it, I thought it's too shocking. People really won't believe it here in the US. So a documentary seemed to me a great way to bring this story out of the shadows and let people know what's going on. And that led me to, Kristi was one of my favorite documentary filmmakers. I really admired her work, and I brought the idea to her and said, well, what do you think? Do you think there's a film in this? And she said she thought there was.
And how difficult was it for you guys to narrow your story down? I mean, it is such an expansive story, but you guys tackle it from a bunch of different angles. But how did you decide sort of narratively which people to follow?
Well, I think it was a challenge because there are 50 million people in America who are dealing with hunger and food insecurity, which is a big number, and it's happening in every single county across the country. But I think what we tried to do as filmmakers is explore where and when and how hunger is happening in the places where you might least expect it. And for example, we filmed in a small town in Colorado where all the people in that town who were experiencing hunger were working people, struggling every day to make ends meet and feed their kids and their family. And that surprised us. So we wanted to share with audiences, you know, just the very real experience that people were having in hunger across the country.
One of the things that was the most, I mean, there are a lot of shocking things in this documentary. But one of the things that I found so surprising and you guys go in depth dealing with was the fact that people can be both obese and starving. And I think that that's a misconception. What are some other misconceptions that the film sort of tackles and that people have about hunger in America?
I think one of the big issues is that this is something we can't fix, that this is too big of an issue, and let's just kind of get people fed a little bit, and let's not address the root issue. So I think that's one misconception. I think the other misconception is thinking that we can actually fix this through charity, which is kind of how I got involved. And for the last 25 years, I've been helping to raise money for various hunger issues. And I thought that was fine, just doing my part and helping to raise money. And then I came to see that this is really a political condition.
So what is it that people can do? And what are some of the ways that people can sort of help out?
Well, I think Tom said it really well. He said hunger in this country is a political condition. So what that means is that people, extraordinary numbers of people, are going hungry in this country because we have outdated policies or policies that don't necessarily reflect the reality of people's lives. For example, one of our characters is a terrific young woman named Barbara Izquierdo, and she's working really hard to feed her kids, and she had lost her job, was on food assistance, and when she finally got a job, and it was really empowering, and we were so excited for her. We followed her on her first day to work, and it was a dream come true, and as a result of that job, her kids ended up hungrier than before because she was immediately cut off the food stamps, or SNAP as we call them now, and was in a worse situation, ironically, than before. So a lot of the policies that are in this country that are supposed to address the problem are either inadequate or outdated, and if we can decide as a population to make this a priority and to let our elected officials know that it is a priority to us, they'll have to act on it. Very recently, we've seen huge movement on gun violence. People have decided enough is enough, and they're speaking out, and you see politicians responding.
Right.
At least the conversation is starting to happen, and change will happen as a result. This needs to be a voting issue, too. And I think the people watching this movie have a role to play in helping make that happen. The social action campaign on TakePart is going to give people the tools and a really quick and effective mechanism to do that.
And I mean, I think that we as filmmakers are really fortunate to have been able to partner with Participant on this campaign, because from the beginning, we reached out to all the major anti-hunger groups, people fighting on the front lines, both for their help in telling the story, but also so that we could work together ultimately to ensure that the film has an impact. And what you can do, you see this film, you feel moved, you don't think this is okay to be happening in your country, all you need to do is text or log on, and we will give you the means to make your voice heard.
I think we need to acknowledge, organize ourselves, and then act upon it. So the film hopefully can get people to acknowledge that there's hunger to this extent in this country, and then through this, the campaign can actually organize around that campaign, and then hopefully that will compel people to act.
One of the other things that was incredibly surprising to me was, going back to the donation thing, is the idea that when you do get free food, that it's incredibly unhealthy. It's sustenance, it's something to put in their bellies, but it's the absolute worst thing to put in there. Are there affordable options for people out there that they can actually get cheap, healthy foods, or is that just non-existent?
Well, I think, first of all, you bring up a good point. As filmmakers, we discovered time and again when we were filming at the food banks and the people who were receiving those donated items, we just started to see that, over and over again. And we talked a lot, the filmmaking team about, how are we going to address this? And then we realized that it's really illustrative of the larger problems that we have in our food system. And for many people, no, there are not affordable, healthy foods available to them, sadly. And that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah. How do we get to this point? How do we arrive in a situation, in a place in such an affluent country where there are this many people who are starving, food scarce, and obese?
I think it's a sort of confluence of different factors that brought us to this moment in time. As we show in the film, back in 1968, there was a number of, close to 10 million people in this country were really living in starvation conditions. And back then, CBS did a news story that aired called Hunger in America. And it was really shocking. It showed a newborn baby dying from malnutrition. I mean, this is shocking stuff. And Americans were amazed. They had always been led to believe that hunger was something in the third world. And en masse, they picked up the phone and they contacted their legislators to demand that they fix it. And as a consequence of that, and also of the sort of larger media coverage at the time of hunger and poverty and the government's role in all of that, we saw real effective change. And the modern food safety net, as we know today, was crafted and frankly funded well enough that we nearly wiped out hunger by the end of the 70s. But the political script changed. A different sort of mindset came with more conservative administrations, and they sort of got people away from the idea that it's in our collective best interest to feed everybody healthfully and well, and towards the idea that, well, who are these lazy people who want a free ride? And that dialogue, not only does it mischaracterize the vast majority of people who do rely on food assistance, because the vast majority do have a working adult at home, it also allows the politicians in this country to divest themselves of some responsibility for fixing it. So, and because the language around this type of problem has incorporated a lot of blame, the people who are suffering from it are kind of blamed for their own condition, and it's time for us to start to refocus the dialogue on how we can fix it, because it's fixable, and the people who are suffering from the issue are pretty much not to blame for it. So we hope to recharacterize that and engage people around fixing it.
And it's a fascinating thing to sort of wrap your brain around, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, but it is this weird thing where it's like people that are obese, I guess, are stigmatized by that obesity, like because they feel guilty and awful about their state. but they're also starving at the same time, right? And that's
I think malnourished is really a great way to put it.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it is more than anything, right?
Yeah, but you are starving a brain if you're malnourished or a kid's development.
The consequences of even mild undernutrition on a young child are really devastating, and more absences from school, more hospitalizations, and a whole host of sort of cognitive and developmental delays and problems can result. So Rosie, was experiencing, absences from school, but also, as she articulates better than any of us can, she was, really struggling to focus in school. And, the uplifting piece of her story, though, is that she had a teacher who could recognize the signs, who could recognize that this is a girl who wants to succeed in school, who wants to be doing well, and who has an incredible spirit, but she's being hindered. Her hands are literally being tied behind her back because she's hungry every day. And I don't think that it's okay to have one kid experience that in our country, in the richest nation on the earth, let alone 17 million.
Can you talk a little bit about Barbie, the single mom, and sort of paint a picture of her life?
Yeah, I mean, we did a tremendous amount of research, and that involved, reading up on a lot and talking to a lot of people on the front lines. But we were really fortunate in that very early, after we set out to make the film, we read an article about Dr. Mariana Chilton, who is a scientist who understands the health consequences of undernutrition on children specifically, but also so frustrated by the fact that she was presenting these facts all the time to decision makers in DC and having no impact. She founded an organization called Witnesses to Hunger, which we feature in the film. And we met Dr. Chilton, who shared with us, so much of her knowledge, which really helped us. But more important, she introduced us to the Witnesses to Hunger, and we started attending their meetings. So this was 40 women in North Philly, many of them, most of them mothers, all of them experiencing hunger and food insecurity and housing insecurity and a host of other issues. They really enabled us to understand the issue on a real personal level. And Barbie Izquierdo was one of those witnesses. And so we got to know her through observing and attending those meetings.
Barbie is one of those young women who could be a great leader. She could go and become an elected official. She could be president of the United States. But most of her day, when we met her, frankly, was spent scavenging and scrounging for food for her kids. So it got us really thinking about the sort of lost human potential of this issue. She is so articulate, she's funny, she's wise, she's passionate, she's actually has become a national activist on this issue, and really has done a lot to help shape the conversation on it. But she couldn't do any of those things when she was just trying to get food. And we show through her story what it feels like to be in her shoes. And we're very excited that through this film, somebody saw the film and actually offered her a full paid scholarship to college. Wow. So she moved her children to the Lancaster area where there are farms, and she's able to really offer her kids an alternative. But that's one person, sure. And we're really glad that the film had that impact on her. But I think the film ultimately, we hope, will be able to help create lasting change for millions of people who are very much in Barbie's situation, because it's unacceptable. We don't have to have this condition. We are actually, as a nation, not making choices we could make to fix it, and fix it soon.
I think the stories are really important for a lot of different reasons. And I think that Lori and Kristi did an amazing job of telling these stories, because when you look at them, there's a story of a teacher. There's stories of police chief. There's stories of a child dealing with obesity, a story of a young girl sort of dealing with hunger and how it affects her school life, the story of Barbie and how she has to struggle to feed her kids. And so it's important to actually show a wide range of issues around this subject, because it's how you connect to the issue. It's one thing to show facts and figures and talking heads. You don't make a connection with that. You make a connection through real people struggling. And you see that person, and you may not know Barbie, but you know someone like Barbie. Right. And you may not know Tremonica, but you'll know a kid like that. And you may not know a Rosie, but somewhere, maybe in your family, there's a Rosie. And so it's really important to make a connection, because only through that connection will you actually sort of decide to make a decision to help and to do something about this.
How big a role can education play in preventing this or reversing the problems that we face? I mean, that to me, I have a niece and a nephew, and I see them make bad food decisions and choices. Granted, they're kids and they don't know any better, but like, what kind of things can we do to educate not just kids, but people around us? Let's say they don't see this film.
Well, but let's just be clear on something. Someone who has very little money to feed their family, they don't have a choice.
Right.
They're buying what's cheap as possible, okay? And so then you got to say to yourself, well, why is it that highly processed foods that we consider junk food, why are those foods cheap compared to fruits and vegetables that are expensive? And so it's easy to demonize someone for making those choices, but then you got to decide, or ask yourself, do they have a choice? And then you look at the role the government plays. So if there's $20 billion that are going out there to subsidize foods, it's going to the majority of that goes to subsidize foods that are used to make unhealthy food, where some of that money would go to subsidize fruits and vegetables and bring the price of fruits and vegetables down, well, then maybe there would be a choice.
But as it stands right now, there really isn't much of one.
No.
Right. And I think that you raise a great point, though, about education, which is one of the reasons why we focused on the town of Jonestown in Mississippi and Jonestown Elementary School, because here is a school in one of the poorest counties in one of the poorest states in America. Not a lot of resources to do a lot of rooftop farming and these kinds of things that happen in a lot of urban areas. And they found a way to not only get healthier foods into the school meals that kids are eating every day, but to introduce it in the classroom. And what Miss Odessa Cherry does in that classroom is like nothing short of it's phenomenal what she's doing. And she's doing it with such great thought and care, in that the fruits that she's introducing to those kids in the scene, one of my favorite scenes in the film, where she introduces the honeydew, the honeydew to these kids, and you see they're just eating it up, and you can taste it when you're watching. And then she asks, how many of you would rather this than chips? And the hands went up. And I was shocked, that all the hands went up who wanted to eat more honeydew. But what was important is that she's introducing them to fruits and vegetables, but she was also introducing them to the most affordable fruits and vegetables, taking into account what they have access to and the kind of incomes that are at home. And I think that it's a really, really important piece of the solution. We know that government plays a role in ending hunger, but we also know that education of kids around these issues is critically important. And I'm glad that you raised that point.
One of the best quotes in the movie was towards the end, and I think it was Raj Patel says at some point, he said that the issue of hunger is a larger issue about poverty in America.
There is no question that there is hunger in this country because people can't afford to buy the foods they need to not be hungry or food insecure. And really, the conversation needs to focus on a living wage. We were really excited to hear that President Obama brought up the idea of raising minimum wage to a living wage level in his State of the Union. That conversation is something we should embrace as a nation, because we have never met a person who is on food assistance in this country who preferred that to being able to buy food for their family themselves. And we need to look as a nation to ways that we can sort of give people back the dignity of being able to feed their families without having to ask for a handout and without having to be made to feel like takers. So I think our language around it is really important. Our language at the dinner table, in your own house, at cocktail parties, whenever this subject comes up, I think we all have a role to play. You mentioned education. I think education of everybody is really important in this, because as long as we persist in using language about poor choices or bad lifestyle choices or takers or the 47% or whatever it is, we are obscuring the truth, which is that people who are abiding by the social contract in this country, who are doing everything they can to be connected citizens, should at least be able to put food on the table. We've gotten away from that, but we hopefully have shown in the film that it is within our means and our power and our knowledge to get right back to where we need to be.
Absolutely.
And I think that, one thing that Raj, really points out is that, hunger in America doesn't exist because of scarcity of food. That is not why we have hunger in America. It's because of, increasing inequality and people's inability to afford food. And that's not the case in a lot of places where there is hunger. That's where we stand alone.
It's so infinitesimally small, the amount of money. I mean, what was it? It's like on average $5 or something like that a day to feed?
The average,
3 to 5.
if anywhere,
3 to 5.
it's like $4 and change is the national average of what somebody actually has to spend
A day.
on food.
Breakfast,
a day.
lunch, and dinner.
Right. I mean, that was just mind-boggling to me. I think people think that they're getting like $100 a day to
Well,
go
that's one of the
and
things
blow at
about
the grocery
food
store.
stamps.
So
and SNAP-
relative to the subsidies that many agribusinesses get,
Right.
it's certainly
Yeah.
not a lot.
And I think that there's a lot of misconception around SNAP, food stamps. People believe, and every so often you'll see a sort of hysterical story in the press about some lottery winner who's going and buying steaks or whatever with their food stamps. And this kind of, it's a myth. The truth is that the majority of people who are on food assistance, these are military families. These are very often people with working adults in the home, and they are not living the high life at all. SNAP dollars are one of the most effective ways to erase the difference between people who are food insecure and people who are food secure. The programs that we're talking about in the film, like SNAP, like WIC, are on the chopping block. These are programs that are going to be cut almost immediately if we don't, as a nation, say, whoa, this is an investment in our future. And if people are given enough purchase power to buy food for themselves and their families, it pays off in productive work, productive education for their kids in numerous ways so that we don't end up paying much more for it later.
Why are documentaries such a powerful medium or entertainment, and how is it that you were drawn to them, or why is it the best way or a great way for people to get issues highlighted?
I mean, I believe that documentaries give people a chance to experience something other than their own experience, to understand deeply and hopefully profoundly, the experiences of others. And I think also that the role that documentaries play is a critical one, because I think that, for example, with this subject, the mainstream media isn't asking the questions that we ask in this film. They're not, looking at how and why we have a hunger problem here in America. And I think the onus often falls to documentarians to explore these kinds of things. I could list a gazillion films that inspire me to that end. So I just think we have an important role to play in bringing awareness about these problems and provoking the American public to think in an informed way, and then hopefully be moved and act.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I really, really enjoyed the movie.
Glad to be
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
much for your thoughtful
Thanks, David.
questions.
For BFD, I'm David Park. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you soon.